Those of you that are watching online, welcome. Obviously, welcome everybody that's here this morning. We want to give Andy as much time as possible, so I'm going to pray. Included in my email yesterday, we'll have some opportunity for questions, and so specifically for those that are watching via the live stream, you can either text me the questions, or you can, if you're watching on Facebook, you could comment, and I'll keep track of those, and then we'll take time to answer the questions. But I want to give him as much time as possible. Let me pray, and then we will start. God, thank you for just another day that you've given to us, and we know that with it comes your renewed mercies, and we praise you for that. We recognize that, and Father, we ask for your blessing in our time now. Pray that you would free us from distraction, allow us just to focus on you and the truths that we're about to jump into. Pray for your blessing on Andy. Give him wisdom. Let your Spirit fill him and use him. Let him speak truth. Let him speak on your behalf. And Father, just draw us near to you, embolden us for you, and give us wisdom so that we can reach our communities and our loved ones with the gospel. We pray these things in Jesus' name. Amen.
All right. Good morning. That was great. We're awake now. All right, so good morning. Yeah, I can't really see you very well, so you're gonna have to speak up because my retinas are being seared by the lights. So it's great to be back here with you. It's been a little bit, and I'm just thrilled to be able to go anywhere. And if you're going to be with us tomorrow morning, I'll share. I think I'm sharing in the Sunday school hour. I don't know if we're doing okay. Good, but I'll share a little bit more about what's going on in the ministry. Last speaking engagement I had before the shutdown was March 9th, the weekend of March 9th, and then we were all locked up forever, and we were kind of holding on to hope that speaking engagements that I had lined up during the summer were going to hold on, but they all started falling like dominoes really quickly. And honestly, we were getting a little concerned because those honorariums that come in from speaking engagements really help supplement our the gifts and stuff that come in monthly. And so we're really wondering what's going to happen, but I have a few stories to share with you tomorrow about how God really provided for us. I even got to go speak at a camp in Michigan in the end of June, and then since the first weekend in September, I've been on the road somewhere every weekend from the beginning of September, and I will be through the end of next month. So, unless the world comes to a complete crashing halt after the election, which it could, then I don't have anything to worry about anymore. But I'm very thankful for that. Doing some pulpit supply in a little church in upstate New York throughout the month of November and things like this. So, but again, I'll share a little bit more about that with you tomorrow. Okay, so here's what we're going to do today. I have been involved with youth and or college ministry my entire adult life. And it's a little funny because I didn't really plan on it. I thought maybe for a while when I was a kid, I had a youth pastor I really looked up to. In fact, I had a couple, and they would say things to me like, "Andy, we think you're going to be a youth pastor." And I thought, I do not want to do that. That sounds terrible. I don't want to do that. And then I went to Bible college, and I wanted to be a history teacher, and I got talked out of that. And wouldn't you know it, I ended up falling into youth ministry, or it was part of God's providence. That's probably it. So I've been involved with youth ministry as a youth pastor, as a youth leader in my church, as an itinerant youth speaker for many years. And then the past 10 years or so, really been involved also with college ministry. And there are some interesting phenomena that you probably are aware of. Just by virtue of the fact that you're watching this, if you've heard me speak before, because you're here this morning, you're probably aware of the statistics of what we should expect of the average student who identifies as a Christian, and we'll use that term broadly. These are the surveys that are being done, And the surveys tell us that by a student identifying as a Christian broadly, so that could mean Protestant, Orthodox, or Catholic, the likelihood that that student identifying as a Christian, once they leave home and if they go to college, the likelihood that they're going to maintain their faith in God, maintain their Christianity, is very, very low. In fact, the numbers tell us, the statistics, the surveys tell us that a student really only has a 1 in 4 chance. I want you to think about that, youth pastors in the room. 75% of students that identify as Christian grow up in a youth group that go off to college. It is expected that 75% of them are going to abandon their faith. So if we could take you 4 young ladies right there, the statistics say 3 of you will abandon the faith. 3. Don't point fingers. Jeez. We're not taking bets. Awful. What's wrong with you? But I'm just saying the statistics are not good. And we tend to think of students going off to college and we wonder what happens to them. And that's a great question. And that's something we really need to think about. But in my observation and in my experience, there's different sets of ways of thinking that I think we need to try to understand before our kids leave church, before they get out of youth group, if we're going to have a chance and we're going to do something other than just provide a good experience for them from, say, 7th grade to 12th grade, and I know that's not your goal. I understand that. But across the board, that's what it seems like, right? It's just we jump from one experience to another. We have become very existential in how we see spiritual growth and how we see ministry. It's in the moment, right now, and I have to experience it. That's what existential means. It's also become very pragmatic. We ask, what works? It's the gospel according to Aristotle. And there's nothing wrong with asking what works or what should we do. That is part of Christianity, but I think if we are going to actually be part of the solution, we're going to have to move beyond what we do, and we're going to have to start asking questions about what is someone thinking? How do we get inside their minds to understand what they're thinking? Now, I'm actually going to stand here, and please don't think me arrogant, but I'm going to claim a little bit of knowledge and perhaps even some expertise in this area. And if you were to say, how dare you? That's fair. If you were to say, Andy, how would you know? Clearly, you are several years beyond the average college student. Yes, I understand that. So if you're wondering, how in the world do I know? Excuse me. It's because I've graded well over 4,000 theology and philosophy papers. And students tell me what they think all the time. And I've been paying attention. Plus, they actually speak to me sometimes, which is kind of nice. And I have conversations with them. And I just pay attention. So I want to share some of that with you today. Please feel free to ask questions. What we're talking about over the next few hours is going to break down into 3 parts very nicely. I do have a very strong Baptist background, so I like my 3s. Very Trinitarian. So we'll stop at the end of one, and we'll see if you have questions or if there's questions that are coming in via text, and we'll deal with them. All right? So to begin, I want to read a few lengthy quotes from you. There is a book some of you may have been forced to read in high school, and I hear giggles, so perhaps this was even recently. You know, I was forced to read this book in high school as well, and I thought it was the dumbest thing I'd ever laid my eyes on. It's called Beowulf. A story that has survived since the 8th century. That's the 700s if you're from South Scranton. It was a long time ago. And I would say that Beowulf, outside of the Bible, and of course, The Lord of the Rings, is probably among the greatest redemption stories that has ever been written. I didn't get it when I had to read it in high school because I was just a knuckle-dragging knucklehead. in high school, and I didn't understand what great literature was. But let me just give you a little bit of background, and I'm gonna read some of this to you, because I think this captures the idea of what I want to talk about today, about these monsters that are prowling our campuses, all of them, and the monsters that our students, our children, actually raise from pups, and they bring with them to college. And when they get there, they turn on them, and they try to devour them. You cannot have a pet wolf. So let me explain to you what's going on. The narrator, in the Tolkien translation, by the way, which is really easy to understand, so if you read probably the Seamus Heaney translation, I would imagine, that's a good one. This is better. Like I would know, like I could translate Anglo-Saxon, but I am learning it. So here's a story. There's this great kingdom of what are called the Spear Danes. And we're told some history of the generation of these great warriors. And we're told that they are God-fearing people living in what we would know today as Denmark. And they have had years and years of Christianity, but somehow that has been lost. And the king, after a few generations, and this is all within the first several hundred lines of this poem, is a guy named Hrothgar. And he has built a great hall, a great mead hall, where the Spear Danes, the warriors, meet, and they tell their stories, and they drink their mead, and the bard will come in and sing the songs. And the narrator says that there was a time when the Spear Danes would gather, and what they would sing about was the creator of the universe, who gave them all good things. But somehow that got lost. But before it got lost, the songs they were singing awakened an evil. A monster named Grendel, who for years would come to the great hall called Heorot and would steal away the men, destroy them, rip them to shreds. And this went on for years. Let me read you this first quote. Long was the while the dear Lord, that's Hrothgar, endured anguish and every woe and sorrow deep. Truce he, Grendel, the monster, would not have with any man, nor would withhold his deadly cruelty, nor accept terms of payment. The fierce killer pursued them still, both knights and young. A dark shadow of death lurking, lying in wait. Men know not whither, sorcerers of hell in their wanderings roam. At times, they, the Spear Danes, vowed sacrifices to idols in their heathen tabernacles, and prayers implored the slayer of souls to afford them help against the sufferings of the people. What does that mean? What is the narrator saying? He's saying that there's a woe that is on these men, because he said that they're actually reverting to, going back to their pre-Christian ways, their pagan ways, and they're actually calling on the very thing that's destroying them to save them. This is going on in the colleges and universities right now. They were mindful in their hearts of hell, but they knew not the Creator, the judge of deeds, nor had heard of the Lord God, nor verily had learned to praise the guardian of the heavens and the King of glory. Woe shall be to him that through fiendish malice shall thrust down his soul into the fire's embrace, to look for no comfort and no wise to change his lot. There is no hope. Blessed shall be he that may after his death day go unto the Lord and seek peace in the bosom of the Father. I'm telling you, this is among the greatest redemption stories ever written. And the story does not end with Beowulf destroying Grendel and his nasty old mother. It goes way beyond that. But in those lines captures the idea that I hope to be able to share with you today about these wolves. And the wolves are not people, but they are ideas. And if you've ever heard me speak before, you've probably heard me quote 2 Corinthians 10, where Paul writes in that passage, a very important passage of spiritual warfare. He says to the people of Corinth, we are in a fight. Make no mistake, we are in a fight. Just like Ephesians chapter 6, same author, same subject matter. He's talking about the full panoplia, the complete armor of God. Why else would you be putting on armor unless you're stepping into battle? Why else? In Ephesians 6, he says, yes, again, we are in a fight, but our fight is not against flesh and blood, but against spiritual darkness. Same idea over in 2 Corinthians 10. It's just not as popular because you can't dress kids up for VBS out of 2 Corinthians 10. So in 2 Corinthians 10, he says, listen, we are in a fight, and you have weapons. So this idea that being a Christian in the 21st century means that our chief end is to be nice. I'm sorry, that is incorrect. Niceness is not a Christian virtue. In fact, if everyone loves us, something is probably wrong. He says we are in a fight. Our weapons are not like the world's weapons. In fact, the weapons we wield are divinely forged. For what purpose? To tear down the strongholds, the ideas that set themselves up against the knowledge of God, so that we may take every thought captive for Christ. This is a fight. It doesn't come easily. You might even say it doesn't come naturally. But it's something that must be fought for. And I wonder if in our youth groups, in our college ministries, if we're fighting hard enough. I wonder. So, I want to tell you about the 3 idea battle spaces that every college student has to worry about. Now, you might be thinking, well, I went to Bible college, or I know plenty of people who do, or I go to a Christian college. Good ones, like Cedarville, ones that take a stand on biblical truth, and I appreciate that. And you might think, okay, my students, my family, my cousins, my nieces, my nephews, my children, they go there. I have nothing to worry about. You're sorely mistaken. These 3 wolves that we're going to talk about are there. One of them, most certainly. The rest of them, kind of. Right? So, here's the first guy that we're going to talk about this morning. Uncle Chuck. Charles Darwin. Now, the thing about Charles Darwin is this guy, for a long time, has been on the kind of the hit list of people that Christians love to hate for all the right reasons, right? I was a kid, and I remember going to junior church. Oh, junior church was glorious. Does anybody remember junior church? So much, yeah. And then when you got too old for junior church, no, it's like death. But in junior church, we learned songs like, I'm no kin to the monkey. And I can still sing every word, and I'm not going to do it for you. But we used to sing songs like that. And Uncle Chuck, we wouldn't even talk about Darwin because they're just words that we wouldn't speak because it seemed incongruous to use those words in any kind of connection to Christianity. And of course, what I'm talking about is the Darwinian theory of evolution, right? This is why many Christians love to hate on Charles Darwin, because of the theory of evolution. Well, I'm going to probably say a few things this morning that might sound a little shocking to you, but just bear with me and listen. And if you have questions, we can talk about it right now. That's fine. But what if I were to tell you that the problem with Darwin is not evolution? What if I were to tell you that? Now, before you pluck the chickens and heat the tar, hear me out. I am not suggesting that I'm an evolutionist. I'm not. And I have philosophical, biblical, and theological reasons for that. For instance, if we did get here via a Darwinian process of evolution, there are some things I cannot explain, like human consciousness, moral responsibility, the imago Dei, the image of God, just to name a few. These are some things I really have a hard time wrapping my mind around if I'm going to go with a Darwinian view of evolution. However, I believe in evolution. Now, I do not believe in macroevolution, kind becoming kind, but I certainly believe in microevolution. And if you stop and think about it, you do too. Do you believe that a guy named Noah took every animal, pairs of them, onto a giant boat? Well, yeah. So did he have dogs? Yeah. How many breeds? One. Yep. So how do we get different breeds of dogs? Microevolution. It's not a big deal, right? Macroevolution, again, that's a whole different story, going from kind to kind. That's a whole different thing. And to be intellectually honest, ladies and gentlemen, we need to stop and ask a question. If we're going to be intellectually honest and kind of back off the hate just a little bit and place it where it really belongs, if you want to have ire with the ideas of this man, they're probably pointed in not quite the right direction. I don't want to say wrong direction, but not quite the right direction. So here's what I'm trying to say. Is it possible that God could have used an evolutionary process if he wanted to? Again, I'm not asking you if that makes sense logically or theologically. I'm just saying, could he have done it? Is it possible? The answer is yes. Now, again, I don't think so. I have no reason to think that. But it's not the problem. The problem with Darwinian evolution is the worldview behind it. The problem with Darwinian evolution is the worldview behind it. What is a worldview? A worldview is a grid or lenses through which everyone processes reality. And it answers fundamental questions. And we're going to actually talk about just a few of those this morning to try to wrap our minds around the issues and what is at stake here. Because this is not just a buffet idea that you can choose to pick up and put down anytime you like. You see, that's part of the problem with contemporary college students, and frankly, high school students as well. They see belief issues as a buffet, and they can pick and choose what they want from different worldviews, and without even thinking about it, they assemble some beliefs that really have nothing at all to do with each other. They don't cohere. Does that make sense to you? They don't stick together. It's like the time, let me give you an example. Like the time I was doing a funeral when I was pastoring in Scranton. An older lady in our church had passed away, and she requested that she not have a funeral, but she wanted a homegoing send-off party. I'm not kidding. So, and it was kind of cool because as a pastor, I buried a lot of very young people. Most of the funerals I conducted were for people much younger than me who died horrible deaths, and I'm not kidding. So when an older senior saint passed away, it was actually a relief. Really was. So a few weeks later, this woman's daughter rented the community house / fire hall / bingo room kind of out in the country, about 20 miles outside of the city, for her memorial service. And when I got there, I thought, nope, she's honoring her mom's wishes. This was a party. There was cake. There were streamers. There were hats. There were no remains. That would have been weird. So there's no casket or urn or anything, but it's a party. And I'm doing the thing. I'm going around. I'm meeting people that I don't know. I'm, trying to be a good pastor. And I meet this young man who identifies himself as her grandnephew. And he was like, "Bud, I thought of her more as my grandmother." And it was like he was angling for something. I don't know, to get back in the will. I don't know who this guy is, but he was like giving me information. I'm like, dude, I'm not in charge of that. But as I'm talking to him, he decides out of nowhere to tell me, "Hey, I'm an atheist." All right, well, bully for you. I don't know why you would tell me that. Thank you, I guess. I guess telling you God bless you is kind of irrelevant, but all right, have some cake. So, yeah, whatever. So I'm going around, we're talking, we're having cake and everything, and then the time comes where we're actually going to have somewhat of a serious time, and I'm overseeing this part of the memorial, and it's the part of the memorial service that I fear the most as a pastor every time, and that's when we allow people to stand up and say something about the departed, because people will say the stupidest things, oh my word. So I've actually learned to ask families, do you want that to happen? And sometimes they say no, for that very reason. I could tell you about the time I had to actually bury an urn myself because a member of the family, like literally, I had to put it in the ground and guard it because a member of the family was going to steal it and not tell the other family members where it was. It was a mess. Anyway, so a few people stand up, and this guy pops up. I thought, oh, well, this will be good. And he said a lot of nice things about her, all true. And then he started waxing eloquent about how wonderful this woman's afterlife is now, how she's with Jesus and everything's great. And I'm thinking, oh, time out, bro. I'm smiling because I have the cheesy pastor/philosopher smile. I can do it. Like, But in my mind, I'm going, this doesn't add up at all. Either you're just talking for whatever purposes you think you're fulfilling, or you have completely disjointed pieces in your worldview. You cannot, on one hand, say, I am an atheist, and all that goes with it. That means something. That means the physical universe is all that there is. You can't both hold that and an afterlife at the same time. It does not fit. So that's what I'm talking about, a disjointed worldview, picking and choosing. And if you want to pick this worldview, you have to take all of it, and with that, what you have to bring with you, the Darwinian worldview you have to take with you, can be boiled down into what amounts to a six-penny word that I'm going to say for you. Biomechanical determinism. Biological, life. Biomechanical, machines. Biomechanical determinism. If I wanted to say that like an 8th grader, because that's really helpful to me, so if there are any 8th graders in the room, please don't be offended. I am one on the inside. If I wanted to try to figure out what that means, it means this. Matter is all that matters. Matter is all that matters. And the actual stuff of the matter has nowhere to go. There's no hope. There's no getting out. There's no escape. We could go back, if you could just think about the quote. I'm sure nobody, well, maybe if you're a fastidious note taker, you tried to write down those Beowulf quotes. Please don't do that. You just ask me. I'll give it to you. But go back to the quote where the narrator is saying it breaks his heart that the thing that is trapping them is the thing that they are worshiping, and the thing that's going to destroy them, they think is going to get them out. Nothing is going to get you out. There's no out. There's no hope. There's nothing. There's nothing that's going to improve the machine. And if he's right, if Darwin is right, we got some real interesting things to try to figure out. First of all, I don't really know. I do know some strictly Darwinian evolutionist atheists. And do you know those strictly Darwinian evolutionist atheists still believe in the categories of right and wrong? Could you please tell me, if matter is all that matters, how in the world do they have those categories? Where do they come from? Because their Bible, it can be reduced to a chart you've all seen, if he's right. And the chart that you have all seen is the periodic table of elements. That's it. Because the periodic table of elements explains every single piece of the physical universe. So a combination of that stuff makes everything. From tungsten to gold to silver to carbon. Dirt, which, by the way, is mostly what you and I are physically made of. So next time you get called a dirt bag, say thank you. It's carbon bag, if you will, but close enough. And if you squeeze me, I'll be a diamond. Oh, sorry, dad joke. It's awful. But anyway, if he's right, so please, can you go with me to the implications here? If he's right, where do those categories come from? Because the periodic table of elements tells you how things are, but it can never tell you how things ought to be. Let me say that again, in a different way. if we want to take the holy trinity of the sciences, which is the realm we're dealing in right now, biology, chemistry, physics. And if by chance you're thinking, Andy, are you anti-science? No. Modern medicine has saved my life probably multiple times. I got a raging case of bronchitis every year for 6 or 7 years when I was a kid. I'd probably be dead if this were the Middle Ages. Instead of just buying a simple penicillin-based antibiotic saved my life. How many times? We're using science and technology now. In fact, a Christian view of using technology to alleviate suffering is a good thing. It's a very good thing. Anyway, the periodic table of elements and the holy trinity of the sciences, chemistry, biology, and physics, only tell you how things are. None of that can tell you how things ought to be. You cannot look at the chart or anywhere in the sciences and find out why is it good. Think about physicists, brilliant men like Stephen Hawking. Stephen Hawking, brilliant physicist, an atheist, who would argue a universe from nothing that we're going to talk about here in just a couple minutes. Stephen Hawking amazingly lived for many, many years with ALS, Lou Gehrig's disease. Amazing lifespan that guy had. He should not have lived that long. And do you know what allowed him to prosper and to have some level of comfort? There's nothing in biology, chemistry, physics, or the periodic table of elements that says why a man like Stephen Hawking has any value. Nowhere. However, within the realm of Orthodox Christianity, lowercase o, Stephen Hawking has supreme value because he is made in the image of God. Irrespective of the fact that he was a brilliant scientist, who cares? So, a couple other implications, then we'll stop and see if you have any questions. The first implication, then, is this idea of morality, if he's right. So just think about, instead of the human race and how we interact, and the bare fact that all people on the planet understand there is a right and a wrong. Now, they may disagree with us as to what that is, and that is part of the fundamental question. How do you know the difference between right and wrong? It doesn't say, can I know the difference? Yes, of course, everyone does. There's a moral code. Now, it's in many ways deranged as opposed to arranged, but everybody does it. But outside of that, think of the animal world. Have you ever seen red squirrels and gray squirrels in the same habitat? In the same neighborhood of trees? Not normally. I'm not going to tell you why, because it's embarrassing and really gross. But the last I've seen, no one has said, it's, and it's actually the red squirrels that are the naughty ones here. No one's ever said, we need to bring charges against the red squirrels. If a lion slays a gazelle on the Serengeti, why is that not murder? If a male shark forcibly copulates with a female shark, why is that not rape? I was giving a talk similar to this at a camp, and I had a gentleman come up to me and said, sharks would never do that. They're God's creation. And I said, yeah, they do, bro. You need to sign up for the National Geographic Channel. Just watch Shark Week or something. I'm just saying, it happens. Yes, they do. And you know why? Because in the case of the squirrels and the lions and the sharks, they have no moral responsibility. If Darwin is right, please explain to me why I do. Second implication. Darwinian evolution, and it's interesting because, as many of you know, the book in which this idea became famous in the mid-19th century, Origin of the Species. Darwinian evolution does nothing to explain origin. There's no explanation for origin in the Origin of the Species. However, it's just one small step to go from Darwinian evolution to what's called chemical evolution, trying to explain that life came from nothing, that it somehow popped into existence on its own or has always been there. Now, a couple problems with that. Number one, nothing has ever just popped into existence on its own. Nothing has ever just popped into existence on its own. So if you can prove me wrong, be my guest. But it has never happened. All right? So we can just leave it at that. Now, some would say, well, we don't need God to get things started, i.e., you can be an evolutionist and believe in God. I actually think that's possible. And if you want to argue with me, that's fine. If you have a differing opinion, that's okay. However, if you believe there is no God, evolution is all you got. Right? You cannot speak of creation, because that would assume a creator, right? So you got some problems there with your lexicon if that's the way you want to go. But if you were to say, no, there is no God, we don't need a God for the universe or life in it because the universe has always existed. Well, except for one thing. That's impossible. Mathematically and philosophically, because the physical universe is time-bound. Anything that is physical is bound by time, right? If you're trying to think, I'm trying to think of something that's not time-bound. Everything is time-bound. There's no thing that exists outside of time, including us. So if that's the case and the universe has always existed, you'd never actually get to the present because you can't cross an actual infinite. Now, that makes my brain hurt a little bit, probably yours too. But it's a really good way to think about something. Everything that begins to exist has a cause. Everything. So if you say, well, I'm going to apply that logic to Darwin, what is the cause? And you can't say lightning, or you can't even say, well, the Big Bang, because you could go back and say, yeah, but what caused the bang? I had a professor in college that said bangs have bangers. Sounds a little naughty, I know, but he intended it to. Bangs have bangers. Someone made it go bang. But we're reinforced over and over and over. And I say we because this is not just a high school or college student problem. This is the thing that is in front of you all the time, and I'm hearing it coming up right now. If you turn on the news and you listen to a 5-minute segment of whatever news agency you like, you're going to hear something like, we are going to be the people of science. So what is being more and more relegated to the backstage of basically fantastic, fanciful myth, Christianity. Because it's not science. But I argue there are things that science cannot answer. So, if Darwin's right, we have a real problem. And we are shown this over and over and over. I probably told you this when I was here before, but I walked into a classroom at the university where I teach, and the classrooms, when we're not in a plague year, where I get to teach, normally are in the biochemistry land, and because they're really nice classrooms. And I walked in, and there's a sheaf of paper on the lectern, and I looked down, and I normally don't pay any attention to that stuff because I'm trying to get everything plugged in and get set up for my class, but this caught my eye, and it was clearly a handout for Biology 101. It was the beginning of the fall semester, so like September, first part of September, like a couple weeks in. And I could tell what this was, a giant handout stapled at the top, and in big bold letters it said that the discipline of biology explains every facet of humanity. How does it now? Because I can think of some things that biology does not explain. And I flipped through it and I actually found what I was looking for. I was wondering if it was there, and sure enough, it was. One of the very last points, it said, yes, and biology even explains human consciousness. And it said, because human consciousness is an eruptive property of the evolutionary process. Now, if you can tell me what that means, that would be great. But what that's saying is that a thing, something material, made something immaterial. That's like either a zombie apocalypse scenario, or if you so choose, Terminator, Rise of the Machines. Okay? So like if this lectern develops a consciousness, run. It's over. Like, do not pass go. Like, I'm going to trample you because that's going to be no good. But they're told over and over. And so what does this have to do with Christianity? If all we do, and I'm going to repeat this multiple times today, so by the end of the morning, you're going to say, Andy, the horse is dead. Leave it alone. I know. But sometimes repetition helps us remember stuff, right? So I'm trying to not just indoctrinate you. I want to catechize you. So I'm going to catechize you with this. If all we do is simply give the data, like, well, who made things? God made things. Who made the universe? God made the universe. By the way, sign me up. I hold to that. In fact, I would stake my life. It's major part of the worldview that I have as a child of the King. But if we don't explain why that's important and begin talking about how the pieces fit, a student who has heard it thousands of times perhaps, by the time they get to college, they're suddenly going to hear counter arguments against it as a stronghold that could very easily tear down what they believe in a matter of minutes. I've seen it happen. I've seen it happen. We must teach doctrine, not just indoctrinate. Those are two different things. If you want, if you're interested in more books that you may have to read in high school, just saying, if you're interested in reading a book that is a master's level display of indoctrination, pick up a copy of Aldous Huxley's Brave New World. Dystopian book written in the 1930s, and you will understand very quickly with a bird's eye view what indoctrination truly looks like. It's pretty scary. Okay, I'm going to stop there for this one. I'm going to see if you all have any questions, comments, snide remarks. Might be able to answer for you. Do you understand the implications? Somebody nod. That'd help me. Okay, good. Thank you. All right. So it's not just, I can decide either or. They have consequences. The ideas have consequences. Yes? Yes. This one is not the big issue. That one's coming at the end. But I will tell you, outside of, their question was, how, if at all, how do I see this infiltrating Christian schools? Right? Okay. So, actually, I do have an example for you that you may not think would be a connective part, but it is. But let me just say this. There are schools that do hold a traditional view of origin, right? So my alma mater, unless they've made some radical change that I'm unaware of, okay, Cedarville, I'm sure does, and there are schools that do that. But outside of what some might consider the very conservative Bible colleges and universities like down south, I could start naming Christian universities that call themselves Christian universities that have to hire a token creationist in their biology department. So they have at least one. And I could name them by name. In fact, I'll tell you one, Anderson University in Anderson, Indiana. I've been speaking at a Christian school there, and I was talking to the principal, and he was kind of saying, yeah, we have a lot of Anderson faculty and staff that send their kids here. And he pointed to the kid, he said, see that kid right there? I said, yeah. I said, Anderson just hired his mom, this is like 10 years ago, just hired his mom as the token creationist in the biology department because they had to have one. So, yeah, just because a school says we're a Christian school, well, does that mean there aren't co-ed dorms and it's a dry campus? Big deal, right? So my one example where I do see this, in schools that I know quite well, I've seen this, it's not so much in the realm of biology, but it has morphed into the branch of philosophy that we call metaphysics. Metaphysics, if you have like a Barnes & Noble around here, and do you have one? Oh, good. Okay, so if you went to Barnes & Noble and you walked up to the youth working there and said, excuse me, could you show me the metaphysics section? They're going to go like pale. They're not going to know what that means. They're going to ask, and I would bet you $1, when they finally find the section, you're going to be looking at books on how to read Viking runes and tarot cards and stuff like that. That's the section you're going to be in front of. That's not what it is. Metaphysics is the study of real things that are immaterial, right? So if we're going to have a question of what is the human soul, that fits in that category. Or God. God is real, right? But God is not material. Can't be, because then he would be bound to the same things that we are. Ergo, he's not God. So where I see this is in the realm of psychology and counseling. And what I have seen in Christian schools is a shift away from mind to brain. So one of those is a real thing. And they're not saying, I haven't personally talked to anybody that teaches in these worlds that would deny the soul or the mind. But they are giving way more power to the lump of meat between our ears than it has. Like, for instance, there's absolutely no evidence that you store memories in your brain. Because if that's the case, how would you know anything at death? If the soul survives the body, like we know it does, and we know that it can feel pain, has memories, can have conversations, how's that possible? There's no brain, just a mind, right? Now, that doesn't mean that the brain and mind don't interact. Of course they do. And that's been a question of philosophers for 3,000 years. We're trying to figure out where exactly does one stop and the other start. We don't know, this side of heaven. But I see that. A physicalism is what it would be called, that gives way more power. So we treat the brain and thinking and all that like it's a physiological process. It is not. And that's a philosophical position, but it's also a theological position. I don't know if that helps you see where that might be coming in. Okay, anyone else? Yes, sir. Mm-hmm. Great. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yep. I'm honestly not sure. It would be easier for me if we were talking about Newton, right? Newtonian physics. Newton is like, look at this. Isn't God awesome? I mean, that was explicit. I don't think so. But ideas have consequences, right? So maybe if Uncle Chuck was with us today, maybe he'd back off and say, "Whoa, that I didn't want it to go there." But me, I mean, it's like hashtag philosopher probs. I'm like thinking, yeah, but why else, right? And unlike Newton, that poor guy, right? He got hosed, big time. 250 years of Newtonian physics up until Werner Heisenberg discovered quantum mechanics, right? So for 250 years, it was Newtonian physics, and he's like, this is all for the greater glory of God. It's amazing. I don't see that, Darwin. I'm sorry, I don't. I could be wrong, and if I am, I will accept that. Of the three that we're talking about, what I know of Darwin is the weakest of my presentation, if I'm going to put my cards on the table. The next two are much darker, and I've spent a lot of time how that goes. And if I don't know an answer, I can make it up for the next two. Yeah. All right, any other questions? Pastor Steve? Nothing? Okay. All right, can we take a break so we can get a drink, maybe use the bathroom and that kind of stuff? All right, say 10 minutes. Is that good? All right. Okay. All right. We're going to pick back up here. I do want to just go back and mention a couple things, just a flip side for some things, because there's a little bit of confusion both ways, and I think it would be wise for us to temper our thinking a little bit. So I said that within true Darwinian evolution or chemical evolution, that particular worldview, matter is all that matters. Remember me saying that? Now, if you were to say, Andy, do you agree with that statement? No, I don't. However, if I were to say matter matters, it does. It really does. So we tend to, in conservative Christian circles, theologically conservative, there can be a tendency to go from matter is all that matters to the polar opposite. To say matter doesn't matter, or to even say all physical things are inherently bad, and only spiritual things or immaterial things are inherently good. That is not biblical at all. It is very Platonic, however. That is the Greek philosopher Plato sneaking his way into Christianity. And it's kind of read in there that was his position, and I won't bore you with how I know that. But matter does matter. That's why it does matter what we do with our bodies. It does matter. It does matter what we put in them. It does matter. Like I'm going to talk tomorrow. I think I'm going to go back to one of my favorites and talk about Daniel tomorrow. Why does Daniel mention the vessels, the cups that Nebuchadnezzar stole out of the temple and brought to the temple of his gods, and later Belshazzar plays beer pong with? Why does that matter? Well, that's the Geisman translation. But, I mean, pretty much read Daniel 5. I'm not really all that far off. Why does that matter? Well, because God ordained that stuff for a specific purpose. That's called being sanctified, set apart for a specific purpose. Right? So we could have a very interesting conversation. So let's just go back to implication for Darwin, and then we're going to move on, right? If at the core worldview Darwin is correct, there is nothing that is sanctified, because there are no logical categories of yes and no, right and wrong. Those are not material things. They are immaterial realities. Does that make sense to you? Not to mention, you're going to have a really difficult time actually explaining what justice is, or what love is, or mercy, or grace, or forgiveness. None of those things you find in biology, chemistry, physics, or the periodic table of elements. And how many of you know maybe stark, raving atheists who will actually tell you you're wrong? Says who? If they're right, says who? It's a hot mess is what it is. Okay. So, let's go on to the next person that Christians love to hate. Herr Nietzsche, or as I like to refer to him, the stash. I mean, look at that mustache. Isn't that not amazing? That guy could filter kelp with that thing. Look at it. All right? So Nietzsche's an interesting fella. Really interesting. And I probably talked about Nietzsche when I was here before doing a talk on existentialism. It's worth coming back to, okay? Because you may understand why it is, or just kind of the cultural norm within Christianity, why we hate Nietzsche. Love to hate him, and it's because, why? What did he say? Famously. He declared God is tot, if you want to say it in German. I probably butchered that. God is dead, and you have killed him. We're like, he tried to kill God. Nope. He was just saying, believe me, he did not believe in God. By the time we get to the Nietzsche that we know. But his statement was basically saying, you know what, the last nail is finally in the coffin lid, and we can just bury this thing and be done with it and move on. Let's stop pretending, right? So that's kind of like we know that Nietzsche is the uber atheist of philosophy, did not have anything nice to say about Christianity. In fact, if you would read some of his writings, you probably would be shocked. It's like, some of it is like looking at a train wreck. You know you really shouldn't be, but you can't stop. It's really fascinating. And some of the things that he said, again, would shock you. But the interesting thing about Nietzsche, again, we don't hate him, but these ideas need to be dealt with because they're part of the thing that's devouring our kids in our schools. And Nietzsche and his philosophies is everywhere. If you think it is only limited to the ivory-towered structures that we call universities or colleges, you are sorely mistaken. Just like Darwin. If you think that is only an academic discussion, no way. Have you ever seen any of the Jurassic Park movies? What do you think that's built on? Biblical creation? You think they consulted Ken Ham before they wrote those scripts? I don't think so. I really don't. Yes, and I've seen them all, and I'm looking forward to the next one. It's going to be dumb, but it's going to be awesome. I'm going to watch it, right? And because I'm listening for this stuff. Or even just to give you another idea with Darwin, how it's everywhere. A few years ago, Kong Skull Island came out. It was really awful creature feature sci-fi thing, totally laced with Darwinian evolution at its core in the language behind it. Just fascinating. Nietzsche is everywhere, inescapable. And what I want to do is I want to walk through some of the Nietzschean ideas that we have with us, and I want to try to help you see why some of these things might be attractive. Because honestly, even with Darwinian evolution, if you're thinking, why in the world would anybody want that? Because it gives you complete, absolute, what we would refer to as libertarian freedom, meaning you can do whatever you want. Or the old question that another 19th century writer, Fyodor Dostoevsky, said in The Brothers Karamazov, if there is no God, anything is possible. And that's not in a positive sense. Or let me say it like an 8th grader for my sake. No God, no rules. So, let's talk about Nietzsche and some of his thinking and his writings and why it's important. On a January day in 1889, actually, I think it was January 3rd, 1889, which happens to be my birthday. I'm not that old, though. In 1889, Friedrich Nietzsche he spent his winters in Italy and his summers in Switzerland. He had left his post teaching. He was only a full-time professor for about 10 years and then started cranking out books thereafter. And so, excuse me, so he would spend, his health was not good, and as the story goes, Nietzsche was on the streets of Turin, Italy, and he saw a man beating an old horse. Horse just wouldn't go anywhere. Sway back, old horse, not doing its thing. And as the story goes, Nietzsche ran over and threw his arms around the horse's neck to protect this horse. Then he collapsed in the street, and he slid into insanity, and he died 11 years later, 1900. Totally insane. The cause of his insanity is not really known. Some say he had syphilis, which caused his insanity, which he may have. He served as an orderly during the Franco-Prussian War, and he was around filth all the time, and he may actually have contracted that disease, well, quite honestly, not through the way you think he might have contracted it. Others say his angry atheism may have driven him insane. I don't know. But he went insane. And the fact that he came to the aid of a broken down horse is completely against all the things that Nietzsche ever wrote about. It's really interesting that was the beginning of his end. Because Nietzsche, one of the first things, so if you're taking notes, let me try to give you a bit of an outline here. One of the things that Nietzsche said was all important is power. Power. I spoke at a family camp over Labor Day weekend in Wisconsin, and there happened to be, I was talking to somebody there, and they did a really good Dr. Ian Malcolm impersonation. You know, what's the actor's name? Thank you, Jeff Goldblum, who's pretty much the same character in every movie that he plays, because he just has that way of talking that just kind of, right, it's the same. So guy did a really good Jeff Goldblum impersonation, so I had him come up and give the quote from one of the more recent Jurassic Park movies where he says, life finds a way. It's the power that it's going to live, it's going to come out, it's going to demonstrate itself by ever-increasing moments of power. And this is one of the Nietzschean themes, not Darwinian themes, one of the Nietzschean themes of the Jurassic Park series. Fascinating. Nietzsche said that. He said at the center of all things is power. Now, why is that an important question to ask? Why is it important to ask what is the center of all things? Well, because it is actually one of those fundamental worldview questions that I told you about. It's one of those fundamental questions. So if we want to go back to Darwin and say, well, what would be fundamental questions? There's a couple of them, but one of them, it really comes down to what is a human person? Now, if Darwin's right, and those who came after him and have even weaponized, if you will, his theories, a human person is nothing more than a machine. Well, what are the implications there? What do you do with a machine that continues to break down? What do you do with a machine that continues to break down? Keep fixing it? Replace it? You throw it out? Or you recycle it? Again, Aldous Huxley, Brave New World. It's in there too. For Nietzsche, asking one of the fundamental questions he's dealing with is, what is the center of all things? Now, this, if you think this is only a question for philosophers and nerds that think about this stuff, nope. It's actually in the Bible. First few verses of the book of John, chapter 1. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. Now, you think he's talking about this word? Nope. He's talking about the Greek philosophic idea of the center of all things. You can translate the word logos into word, but probably the better understanding of it, and this just wouldn't be poetic for John 1, so I get it. Nobody's going to needlepoint this and slap it on the refrigerator. But the better idea is the unifying principle, or what holds everything together. This is a question asked 400 years prior, 399 BC, by Socrates. What holds everything together? And his answer actually got him executed by a jury of his peers. And it even goes to the pre-Socratics before that. The earliest recorded human attempts at philosophy, they're asking, what is the logos? What holds it all together? So this is a fundamental question. And if we're to say, well, what is the what does hold it all together? A simple reading of John would be the logos. He is with God, he is God, and without him, nothing was made that has been made, right? But if you just stop there, you're kind of missing out. If you do a simple word study, even on something like logos, you'll find it's multiple pages. It's really, really important. So as a Christian, as a man that identifies as a Christian, and more importantly, God identifies me as his son, giving me the right to be called his son because of the logos. I'm telling you, the implications, that's what I'm trying to get you to think about here. I have an answer to the question, what is the center of all things, or what is the makeup of prime reality, is the way we would say it in a philosophy class. What holds everything together? So Nietzsche is saying what holds everything together. Now, is he going to start with God? No. In fact, we know when he broke officially with any idea of religion. 1865, while he is a student, he wrote a letter to his sister. And he said, look, If you actually want to have reality in your life, then think. If you want a fantasy life, then believe. And so we actually know, we have it in writing. Probably he had a break point before he actually penned that letter, but 1865 is when he had the break. So we know that there's no idea of God in his life. Although he did have a reverence for the idea of the Greek gods, two of them in particular. The first one is Apollo. And different gods have like different things that they're kind of in charge of, and there's some crossover sometimes. But Apollo is one of the very powerful gods. He's the far striker, the archer, one of the gods of wisdom, and one of the gods of war. Very powerful. He liked that idea, so this raw, warlike, fighting spirit, and if you read any of Nietzsche's writings, he doesn't really philosophize, he just drops hammer blow after hammer blow. Boom, 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 beating you down. How do I know that? I've read most of it. By the way, can I share a prayer request with you for our ministry? I study the darkness a lot. I study the darkness. I read Nietzsche. I read Camus. I read Sartre. I read Wittgenstein. I read Lyotard, unfortunate name. I read Foucault and a bunch of other people that are telling me what I believe and what you believe is abject nonsense. Why do I do it? Because I'm trying to understand the generation to which I'm called. But it's not always pretty. None of it's good, but I can still find good in it because he's an image bearer. Anyway. So, Apollo, loved him. The other guy that he liked was the Greek god of what I consider the red solo cup, Bacchus, or Bacchius, kind of a fat, little, ugly god that apparently could hold his liquor. So he was the god of the theater, and he was the god of, well, booze. He was the party god. So Nietzsche would say that is the ideal. That is the ideal that we need to go for. This idea of the eagle soaring, Apollo, and the snake on the ground, Bacchus. Some combination of those two things. That would be the definition. So, and he didn't really believe in the gods per se, but the idea of what they represented. So then, Nietzsche would say, okay, well, if there is no God, there's got to be something in that vacuum. That's the thing. Something has to be the logos. In every worldview, there is a center. I would argue that for most of our students, unwittingly, they may not come out and say it, but the thing that's being told to them over and over again is that they are the center. They are their own logos. Right? You tell me that that's not the message that they receive. Now, we would never tell them that. Explicitly, implicitly, it is everywhere. They are being catechized with that idea. So, for Nietzsche, he's got to fill in that gap with something somehow, and that something somehow is power. Either you have power and you're going to wield it, or you do not and you're going to submit to it. And if you stop to think, well, I wonder if I have power or not, according to Nietzsche, you ain't got any. If you have to ask, you haven't got any. In fact, you are what he would call a sheep. Or the Soren Kierkegaard would say herd, but for much different reasons. But for the same kind of principle, you and I are nothing but sheep. And another way to know if you're a sheep or not, it's because you're here on a Saturday morning listening to me talk about this stuff. Only dumb sheep would ever dream of doing something like that. So what's at the center of everything? Power and the exercise thereof. Nietzsche, let me give you something else that he taught. And that is time is a flat circle. Time is a flat circle. I visited a new faculty member in the philosophy department the other day, and on his desk, he had in a box a Nietzsche wristwatch. I'm like, whoa, I need to see that, because I would totally impulse buy something dumb like that. And I looked at it, and there are no numbers, and there's only one hand. And what does that one hand do? It goes around and around and around. It's never a completion because there are no numbers at all. It just goes around and around and around. Because Nietzsche believed that we are stuck literally in an infinite loop. We are stuck in time in an infinite loop. It's never, ever going to stop. There's no on-ramp, and there certainly is no off-ramp. Remember the Beowulf quote about one of the middle? I think I showed you three slides of them. Remember the middle? And it said, "Woe be unto these people because there's no chance of changing anything." Well, that almost, as the narrator is lamenting the plight of the Spear Dane and their savagery under Grendel, it's almost a foreshadowing of Herr Nietzsche. Because he would say time just goes around and around and around infinitely. However, the particles, the stuff within time, the stuff that makes up you and I, according to Nietzsche, is not infinite, but is finite. What does that mean? That means it may take eons and eons and eons, but this right here, look around you, take a mental picture, will happen again just like this. Now, it'll take millions and millions and millions of years, but this same situation will happen again. And so what does Nietzsche say that you do about that? You throw your shoulders back, you put your head up in the air, and you say, I will exercise the power I have now because I can. Yeah, he would say God is dead, but in essence, he is claiming himself to be God. Actually, that's not quite right. If you want to read a book that probably you would throw across the room, and I have several throw books on my shelf. If you ever come visit me in my home, I will take you to my Altitude of Solitude. I no longer have an office, but I do now have a study, and I'm pretty excited about that. You could look at the books on my shelf, and I bet you could identify the throw books. You know why? They're beaten up because I throw them, literally. And I stomp on it and say, you godless pagan. No, I don't. I go pick it up, and I keep reading. And in one of those books, it's called The Antichrist. Nietzsche says of himself, I am Antichrist. And if in your mind you think, literally, this is not blasphemous, but you think literally, dear God. People think like that? Who do your children, your nieces, nephews, grandchildren, brothers, sisters, cousins, when they're sitting in the classroom, and by the way, it's not often the philosophy classroom that they get indoctrinated with this stuff. Once in a while. It's history, English, psychology, religion. Who are they told is God? Explicitly and implicitly, they are. The anchor begins and ends with them. It sounds liberating. It sounds glorious. It sounds powerful, but it's no more powerful than taking a power strip and plugging it into itself. It doesn't do any good, does it? Nope. There's no true anchor. Nietzsche also saw himself as helping people be free of systems. So he would hate us, not so much because we're Christians. Well, I'm a Christian. I'm going to assume a good number of you are as well. If not all of you, that would be nice. Not because we're Christians, because we have submitted to a system. And he would say that all these systems need to be torn down. Does that sound like anything you've heard on the news recently? Oh, you better not appoint a Supreme Court justice. We will burn it down. The whole system needs to be taken down and replaced with, anarchy. That'll work. Very effective. And so in the system, religion, he would see as the most egregious of systems that needs to be dissolved, and he would see himself as the savior of knuckle-draggers like you and I who submit to the system. And if that's the case, then what he would refer to is that we basically are the denizens, the residents of Plato's cave. In Plato's Republic, Plato is using his great teacher Socrates as his voice, like he does in just about all of his writings. And Socrates, in this book, is having a conversation with a guy named Glaucon, and they're talking about the perfect city. Plato's Republic is a work of political philosophy. He's laying out his plan for the perfect city, and literally, thank God, no one has ever enacted his plan. It's bad. I mean, I'm on the Plato bus most of the time, but I do not want to go to that place. Really bad. If you want to know why, you can just ask me, and we'll nerd it up later together. But he's talking to this guy who says, well, what kind of citizen should we want in this city? And he said, well, clearly we want someone who recognizes and loves the sight of truth. That sound terrible to you? That actually should sound pretty good. But if you're a thinking person, you might say, what does that look like? How do I know what truth looks like? See, that's a great question. And this is where Plato via Socrates explains what this perfect citizen looks like and how they have come into the light. Very John-like idea of light and darkness. And so Plato uses his famous allegory of the cave. There's these guys stuck in a cave. They look at the shadows in the back, and they're chained there. And then one day, one of the guys, his chains magically fall off. He finds a fire that's making the shadows, and then he tells us someone, never says who, drags the guy outside, rescues him, takes him into the light, and he sees the light. And what Plato was actually thinking about was Jesus. He just didn't know it. He assumes there has to be a rescuer. He just didn't know who it was. So John explains it 400 years later. Anyway, Nietzsche hated Plato because he said Plato is the chief organizer of ideas and systems that needs to be torn down. And so he saw himself as freeing people from the cave of religion and the cave of systems. Now, you tell me, do you think it's common language in media everywhere, in our schools, colleges, high schools, everywhere, to tell our students, you know what, it is good to submit to a system, or you cannot be authentic unless you throw off all boundaries? Which do you think it is? Would anyone like to take a guess? It's the latter, is it not? Which, frankly, is still a system, but that's beside the point. Nietzsche's ghost is going to come slap me, but the guy created his own system. I've read most of his books, so there's a system. It's everywhere. And so your kids all over the place are hearing that over and over. You must be free. You do not need to submit to the norm. Have you ever seen the kids' movie Zootopia? Nietzsche. Actually, that's more Jean-Paul Sartre, but still, it's the same idea. Throw off the system. Become whatever you want to be. In fact, the song that ties it all together at the end of Zootopia, try everything. Because you're never going to be the authentic self if you're stuck in the cave under the system. Another Nietzschean idea, sheeps and wolves. Again, if you're wondering, I wonder which I am. You're a sheep. Because we're here. And what are sheep to wolves? Pets? Food. In the genealogy of the morals, toward the end, Nietzsche says, there is nothing tastier than fresh lamb. eaten, chewed up, bones spit out. You exercise power because there is no God, because what is going to fill the gap? You can't say art, because then what would be the basis of the art? Because Nietzsche was smart enough to say, well, it can't be beauty's in the eye of the beholder. That doesn't make sense. I mean, it can't be that subjective, but it can't have any real meaning or value or purpose because there is no God. It can't be love. He knows that, because how do you have an explanation for that? So what does he have left? Power. There, just about every sci-fi movie that's coming out now somehow has this infinite idea. I'm a big Christopher Nolan fan. Did anybody see the most recent film? Could you explain it to me? Okay. Because I made the mistake of going to an IMAX theater and I couldn't hear half the dialogue anyway, because it was just like, I'm old. I'm like, I have no idea what's going on. But it was time being an infinite loop. Interstellar, same thing. Over and over and over. And then probably my best example, Arrival. You not seen Arrival? We'll talk about that one later. So basically, we're asking the question now, what is brought up over and over again here, ladies and gentlemen, is what is the meaning of meaning? And our kids are catechized right now, of course, not specifically in churches and youth groups, at least those that have, those that are thinking, would never say there is no real reason or purpose or anything, but every other message they're getting is telling them there is no purpose. If Darwin is right, what is the purpose? It doesn't exist. There's no explanation. So if Darwin is right, moving over to Nietzsche, saying, well, if power is all that there is, then how do I determine meaning? And so when a kid gets to college, and they have been told for 18 years there is no reason, meaning, purpose, or value, and then suddenly they get to college and they're told, hey, you now need to find your life's purpose. Now, some kids are going to be like, okay, and they're just going to they're going to jump through the hoops, because honestly, most students, even those who are going to like Bible colleges or great liberal arts schools like where I teach, think the reason to go to college is mainly to learn a skill. That's actually not true. That's called vo-tech school. And if you're spending $70,000 a year on that, you're a doofus. It's much cheaper than that. Yes, do you learn skills of college? Of course you do. I have students in the medical field, and I joke with them all the time. If you ever have to take care of me, I need you to know the difference between the systolic and diastolic numbers of my blood pressure. I need you to have that skill, right? But I also need you to know what a human person is. So they're told that they have to find a purpose. So some of them don't even pay attention, and they just jump through the hoops because it's about learning the skill, getting out, making money, living the life. Some of them stop and think, wait a minute. How in the world can I determine a value of a purpose when there is no system? They've all been dissolved. They've all been destroyed. How do I figure that out? I want to just walk you through another book. So this is not Nietzsche, but this is one of Nietzsche's children, if you will. Now, this is a book I doubt anybody in this room has ever read. Mount Analog. Has anybody ever read this? I thought a hand went up. Like, oh, my word. Nope. You don't need to. It's weird, okay? It's written in 1945. It literally ends mid-sentence, literally. René Dumont was working on this book, 1945. There was a knock at his door. He got up to see who was at the door, and he was dying of tuberculosis when he was writing the book, and he was so sick he could never pick up his pen and finish the book. And I'm going to tell you how he got tuberculosis here in a minute. But this book, this is kind of the kind, nice, gentle youth ministry, I want it to feel good, encapsulation of so many things that Nietzsche was just screaming. Things morph over time, and not that much time, right? Less than 50 years from the time of Nietzsche's death, if my math is correct. And you get this thing, and there's encapsulated in this what your students are catechized with all the time. 1945, in a book you've never heard of, yet these ideas are everywhere. So René Dumont was born in early 20th century in France, and he grew up seeing the horrors of World War I. Moved around a lot to try to escape all that. Now, when he is born in France, France is still, in the early 20th century, shuddering and recovering from the French Revolution, which was nothing like the American Revolution. Nothing. Just read a little bit of history. Primary sources, if you don't believe me. Do you know that the French Revolution had phrases unlike the American Revolution, like "don't tread on me," stuff like that? Yeah, the French Revolution had the idea we are going to strangle the royalty with the entrails of the priesthood. Well, that's nice. That's nice. And is our symbol going to be unity? No, it's the guillotine, which is making a comeback, by the way. At least as a symbol, maybe as an actual instrument in our lifetimes. And so René Dumont, very early on in his life, he gave up the idea of God. However, he did not give up the idea of having an experience where he could touch the divine. So he's trying to do that without God. One of the ways that he attempted to do that was by huffing chemicals as a kid, hence tuberculosis. He destroyed his own lungs and brachials because he was huffing chemicals as a kid, getting high. And he paid for it. His idea in this book is that you must seek your own path. This is the only way to be authentic. A person who wasn't quite a contemporary of Nietzsche, older than him, earlier 19th century, a Christian philosopher named Soren Kierkegaard, asked a fundamental question. He said, how is it that I can live an authentic life before a holy God? What does that look like? And he spent a lifetime and scads of books and pages and papers trying to explore that idea. And I appreciate that very much. Nietzsche asked the same fundamental question from a much different angle. He said, how can I live an authentic life when I know there is no God? What does that look like? And it comes distilled to us in things like Mount Analog. So there's the writer, kind of the narrator, if you will, the person telling a story within the book is a guy who is exploring this idea, and he writes a think piece for the French equivalent of National Geographic magazine. And he sends in this think piece, and basically the think piece says something like this. You know what? I've noticed that every major world religion has mountain motifs. Think about it. Are any important things ever happen on mountains in the Bible? Yeah, lots of them. Right? We're going to look at another motif tomorrow morning, trees. Trees, mountains. Matters. But every world religion, major world religion, has mountains. Even places in the world that don't really have mountains, they make them. Pyramids, ziggurats. That's with a Z, by the way. I didn't say cigarettes. Ziggurats, Mayan temples, Incan temples, right? They're everywhere. Old Testament, New Testament. So this guy writes this thing, and he throws in the motifs of the Bible just alongside of all the others. And he actually says, imagine that there's a mountain that actually existed where you could not only have one foot on the earth, but you could reach up and touch the divine at the same time. And just stop and think about the stories you know, perhaps from your childhood, the things, the scenes in films that talk about this theme over and over. I'm going to reach up and I'm going to touch the face of what? But there's some divine contact. Some kind of divinity. Again, a theme in so many sci-fi films. So he actually gets a letter from someone that's read this news, this thing that he's written, a professor. And I'm going to wait and show you his name here in a second. And he invites He invites this guy to his home, and he actually have to use mountain climbing skills to climb up the side of his apartment building to get into his flat. Weirdo. So he gets there, and he has a meeting with this professor that's a polymath. He knows a lot about a lot. And he says, I actually think this place exists. Here's my reasons. But it's the kind of place you can find when you're not looking for it, and it's like, ooh, all this like mystery stuff. And so they set off on an expedition to find it. And the theme that comes up over and over and over and over again in this short little book is this idea that seeking your own path, throwing off all systems, and creating your own, perhaps from a buffet of what you've seen, or maybe, if you're so intelligent, from scratch. As close to ex nihilo as possible. But what you will never, ever do is follow the path of another. Because that's weak. It's lame sauce. Been there, done that. Where's the adventure? You must create your own path. The guy that he meets is a guy named Father Sogel. Now I want you to take a look at his last name there. Tell me what you see. Anybody good with words? It is logos backwards. That's not an accident. Father Sogel, his backstory, he got kicked out of a monastery because he was such a heretic. And he says this, because he's been looking for this connection of the earth and the divine. And he said, but where to look? Where to begin? I had already traveled the world, stuck my nose everywhere into all sorts of religious sects and mystical cults, but to each one it was always maybe yes, maybe no. Why should I stake my life on this one rather than the other? You see, I had no touchstone. What was a touchstone for? It was to actually help geologists determine the value of precious stones. You kind of rub it on there in the mark. It's so what's the closest thing to a touchstone? Well, apparently everybody that works in retail is an expert in U.S. currency now, right? Because you come in with your $20 bill, they hold it up to the light, and they get out the marker, and if it, I guess it's not supposed to make a mark on the bill. Is that how it's supposed to go? I don't even know. But that's the touchstone to determine the authenticity of that money, right? It's kind of funny. Like, they think I would have the wherewithal to make counterfeit bills. Just like if I have to buy Sudafed, like I have to prove I'm an American citizen. And I always joke with the farmers, I'm like, are you actually worried that I have the chemical knowledge, like to have like a whole Breaking Bad scenario here? Because I don't know how to do that. I have a runny nose. Seriously. But his point is, Father Sogel's point, he says explicitly, and it's in this story, he said, I don't know where to begin. I don't know where it's going to end because I have no anchor. There's no starting point. But we're going to accidentally find it. And this is the theme that comes up over and over. It's so everywhere where our children are told, and you are told, and I'm told as adults, we're told that the only authentic path is your own path. Do you have a social media account that you read ever? These are the posts that come over. You cannot tell me what to do. I'm going to follow my own path. There's nothing else. Because the system has to be torn down. Thank you, Herr Nietzsche. Your children are alive and well. Christian thinker Rod Dreher, in a article called Seminary Confidential, he wrote last July, he was bemoaning the failing of mainline Christian seminaries. So we're not really talking about Baptist Bible Seminary here or Dallas Theological Seminary. We're not talking about those schools. But mainline schools, he said there is a trend, and it is this. An authentic journey is completely unshackled from biblical, theological, ethical, or community restraints unless the traveler personally chooses them. So if you personally, subjectively make the choice, I'm going to adopt this path, well, okay, I guess that's kind of authentic and it can become your own path. But it's never because someone would look at the path and say, you know what? This is right. And I'm going to submit. I think we need to be extremely careful about what we are telling our kids. If you say things to them like, you can become anything you want to be, they cannot. What abject nonsense. They have a level of capacity and ability that cannot be exceeded. Well, I want to be a power forward for the Los Angeles Lakers. Not going to happen. Not going to happen. You can be whatever you want to be. You can decide your own path. Absolutely not. And think about how completely contradictory to Scripture that is. There is a way that seems right unto a man, but in the end there is death. Trust in the Lord with all your heart. Lean not on your own understanding. In all your ways acknowledge Him. He will make your path straight. I was asked to speak on that. I was asked to speak on that particular passage from Proverbs at a memorial service for a 34-year-old woman named Becky that we'd been praying for years. Her sister, very much a part of our church. Becky disappeared after her boyfriend overdosed on heroin. She just was off the grid, and her lifestyle was not good when he died. We did his memorial too. But she was just off the grid for years. We prayed God would do anything to bring her back, and He did. She had hepatitis, she was HIV positive, and she had cirrhosis of the liver. And it was quite evident that cirrhosis was going to kill her. 34 years old, pickled her liver with alcohol. And God did bring her back. She's in glory today. Pain-free. But at her funeral, I was asked to speak on that, and I did. And family didn't have much money, so Becky had been cremated. Her remains were in a container the size of a can of beans. Simple ceramic jar on the big wooden altar at the church that we were borrowing. And I gave this talk, and I didn't hear it, but there were a bunch of kids kind of sitting in the shadows. It's this kind of oval-shaped church, and there are pews in the back, like under the old choir loft, and kind of in the shadows where I would sit if I were, a teenager, of course. And I didn't hear it, but there are some kids over here on my right, and it was just a mercy that God didn't allow me to hear it, but I spoke that verse, and one of the kids said, "Ain't no God going to tell me what to do." Well, Becky's sister, Naomi, who I was her pastor, had asked me if she could share a few words, and her time came right after she heard that. I've heard some good preaching in my day. This was lit. And she looked those kids in the eye and said, "Do you want to wind up in a can before your 35th birthday? Choose your own path. Fit up. See what happens." That doesn't sound very nice. Yeah, but you know what it is? Love. Yeah, you just do your own thing. You're going to find your way to God. No. Let's talk about some other paths. John 14:6. I am the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father but by me. I am the bread of life. I am the good shepherd. What does John say? To all those who believe in his name, he gave the right to become sons of God. What does Paul say in Romans chapter 12 at the end of his discourse on the mercies of God? In view of these mercies, present yourselves daily as a living sacrifice. That sounds a little bit like submission to me. Does it not? Where you climb up daily on the table of sacrifice and say, "Oh God, here I am. You may do with me whatever you please, including slay me." Sacrifices often get slain. Often. we wonder why the numbers are so bad, sending our kids off to college, and we have not fundamentally done a good job across the board in North American Christendom to talk about the deep issues. Sometimes these things come up in my philosophy class. We'll talk about these things, and I can get away with some of it because of where I teach. And I'll have students who know that I am among the nerdiest of nerds because I am a huge J.R.R. Tolkien fan. I think if The Lord of the Rings was around during the Council of Nicaea, may have made it into the New Testament. I'm not sure. That's a joke. I'm just kidding. And they'll bring up a famous quote from The Lord of the Rings, and they'll say, yeah, but Andy, not all who wander are lost. I smile. You know who that quote's talking about? Yeah, that's talking about people that they don't know where they're going. They don't know where they are. They don't know where they've come from. They're just enjoying the journey. I'm like, you know what that's the definition of? Lost. If you don't know where you are, you don't know where you're going, and you don't know where you came from, any one of those three, you're lost. You're quite literally disoriented. That, and I don't yell at him like that. I'm sorry, I'm fired up. I said, that passage is not talking about you knucklehead. It's talking about a character named Aragorn who actually knew who he was and what he was supposed to do and the path that he had to follow, not because he created it, because it was the right thing to do. Oh, yeah. What else you got? Please don't use Tolkien against me because I will own you. But this, I hope you see it. And where does this all come from? From the velvet hammer of Friedrich Nietzsche saying the system has to be destroyed. You will live in your own power. You will decide your own fate. You are the captain of your own destiny. It is everywhere. It is everything. It is the liberating principle. It is the only way you can be authentic. Well, there's a war of ideas here, and the laws of logic tell us it can't both be right. Either you're going to submit to the king, and your anchor is going to look an awful lot like a Roman cross buried deep into blood-soaked ground in a garbage heap outside of Jerusalem, or you will say, I am free of those shackles, and I will climb whatever mountain I like, and I will create my own because I will create my own divinity. So our task is not only teaching the facts of the difference, but we don't not only need to demonstrate what I have told you is true, but that it is good. It's good. That's why the Sermon on the Mount is a manifesto. Matthew chapter 5. Happy is he who. Okay. Questions, comments, and remarks about Herr Nietzsche? Yes, ma'am. I'm sorry, one more time, please. Yes? Are you asking me, like, just for instance, since you brought up, like, should a Christian like abstract art or not? Yeah, sure. Yep, you can like abstract art. However, a Christian should be able to at least be conversant with three key areas that are also within the realm of philosophy. But like I'm asked sometimes, because I've taught theology classes in the university as well, not Bible college, but effectively secular kids. And I'm asked, what do you like better? I don't really know, because I don't see all that much of a separation, it's a problem. But there are three key areas. You should be able to know what is the good, the true, and the beautiful. So, even a bunch of pagan Greeks understood that there is somehow a standard for all three. And even some of the Greeks knew that that standard didn't begin and end with us, but outside of us. Like Socrates understood that. In fact, I have philosopher colleagues where I teach that actually believe Socrates is in heaven. I don't know. But if he is, I got lots of questions. See, my dog might be in heaven too, but I'm also not put bets on that. Cats, no. But maybe my dog. So it's fine to like abstract art. Mm-hmm. Yep. Sure. Well, actually, being creative, so abstract art is something that I personally don't enjoy. I don't think it's wrong. I don't like it. It's like Southern gospel music. I don't get that either. That actually might be wrong. No, I'm kidding. But I don't like it. Right? It's not my thing. I just offended everybody. I'm sorry. It's just not my thing. Okay? But even the folks that are creating that, or even people that are creating abstract art, by creating something, you're actually demonstrating that you possess the image of God. And it's not just Christians that can do that, right? There are artists who would deny that God exists at all, and yet they're still subcreating. They're using the stuff around them to make something new. Not out of nothing. You can't do that. Nobody can do that, right? But that's actually speaking to who you are as a person. Now, to stand out, if you say of your art, what is its purpose? Right? So I'm certainly willing to accept an argument as to how something like abstract art brings glory to God. Now, it's just it's a matter of personal taste, that's all, right? But tell me how that does that, right? And demonstrate how, say, your abstract art points to God, but like a Picasso does not. Even though he is subcreating, so there's something still, there's that spark still there, right? It's not totally extinguished. But he's not doing that for the glory of God. So that's the kind of thing where you can stand out, right? Yeah. So it's why are you doing it? But also there's a higher question: what is it? You understand? So like a lawyer, okay? So I'm going to totally shift gears here, but something that I can speak to a little more. Sorry. Abstract art, right? So, like, you want a skilled lawyer, right? Should you ever need one? But would you want just a skilled lawyer, or a lawyer who doesn't just know how the law works and why, but what is it? What is justice? That's not an easy question to answer. Does that make sense? So, that's one of the ways that we can stand out as Christians. We actually do the work and not just say, why does it work, but what is it? That would be really helpful. I don't know if I answered your question at all. I feel like I talked in circles infinitely, so I'm going to stop. Yes? sure. Yeah. So herd. Oh, the question is, how do I reconcile? Correct me if I get this wrong. How do I reconcile a sense of individual, being an individual, and not just being one of the sheep or cows or the herd? How do I reconcile that with following a path that God has laid out for me? Yeah, that's a great question. And that is and did I state it correctly? Okay, so that is certainly a biblical motif, right? The word university literally means diversified unity, right? So we have thrown in our face right now the word diversity as if that in and of itself is a good. Nope, it's not. It is a good if it's being used in the greater whole to accomplish something, right? Think spiritual gifts, right? Are your spiritual gifts and mine the same? More than likely not, right? A gift mix? I don't think so. Yet, so I don't have to be just like you, and you don't have to be just like me in that respect, but we can use those ways that God has gifted and wired us for something bigger than us, that we get to participate with. So university is a good thing, but just different for different sake. I don't think there's any intrinsic value in that, because you can actually get different that's harmful. Yes. Okay, well, give me a definition of what the herd is. It might be. Mm-hmm. So let me ask a diagnostic question then. So does the New Testament speak to individual Christians or the church more often? Yes. Yep. What does Paul say in places like Philippians? That you may stand as one, contending for the gospel. Unity and uniformity are not the same thing. As long as it's serving the body and bringing glory to God. As soon as you step out of that path, no. Now, are you saying if you were to change gears and say, well, like it's this rugged individualism, like a good American thing? Yes. But that doesn't tell me how to live my life as a Christian. In fact, if we're all being conformed to the image of Christ, is Yahweh one or not? I am the Lord your God, I am one. So it seems like we're being drawn into an ideal, not disparate things. And we are told every which way from Tuesday, be the individual. But just think about like recent church history, not this church because I don't know, but recent church history, where think of I'm going to have my say or my way, and I know you're not saying this, right? But it is related, and how things have been destroyed. stand. I would like more unity. One sec. I would like more unity in the body than we actually have. I really would. And actually, me working where I do, it's kind of opened my eyes. One of my best friends right now is a Russian Orthodox priest. He is legit, this guy. I keep telling him, you don't belong in that church. I took my kids to his church. My wife was up helping her dad. I took him on Russian Orthodox Christmas, December 27th. Because I kept threatening, I'm going to come show up like with a big foam finger. His name is Josh. Like, yeah. He's like, yeah, don't do that. So, and he's about 8 years younger than me. And so I should have done a little more research because I didn't really know what to expect. I told my kids, I don't know what's going to happen. So we were in a church auditorium that from floor to ceiling, the whole thing is covered with visual reminders. Stuff I don't even know. Not one piece of contemporary technology is used in that room except for heat and lights, utilities, nothing. An hour and a half, the whole thing is sung, some of it in Russian. And it was written in Russian, so that wasn't really helpful. And my buddy gave his homilies, we would call them sermons, are only 15 minutes, 20 max, because it is more of the Protestant tradition that the sermon is the centerpiece. For them, it's communion. But he gave the most banging 12-minute message on the incarnation of the Word that I have ever heard. It was amazing. And I thought, wow, God is using this guy in this place. And we have differences about doctrine. Yes. So please don't think, uh-oh, Andy's becoming an ecumenicist. No, I'm not. But this dude is a good brother in Christ. And there's this diversity that's working together for unity, university. Can I get your question, please? What course? Oh, yeah. Oh, they get you early. Sure. You use your own words to write this stuff, and before you know it, oh, yeah. Yeah, just be aware. Yeah, know the enemy, right? And by the way, your job is not to argue with your professor, right? You know that? Okay. Yeah, that's not your job. I saw that in Bible college way too often, and it was not helpful. And you know how many kids argue with me? None. Maybe because I invite them to. I'm like, come on, tell me if you disagree. Like, oh. So it's just, I don't know. Thank you. I'm glad you recognize it. So you see Marx, or Nietzsche and Darwin? Yeah? Mm-hmm. Your what? Oh, and I thought you said emissions. I'm like, well, that sounds weird. Okay. Ambitions? All right. Yeah, follow your heart. Oh, yeah. That's glorious. Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. One of my favorite movies, right? This is wicked old now. I realize Braveheart, right? Young William Wallace standing there. His brother and dad are dead, right? And his dad, like, there's this moment where his dad, his body, his corpse speaks to his son. He says, William, follow your heart. It's good. I'm like, no, it's not. Like, go kill some Brits. But it's not. And you go all the way back to the beginning. Did God really say? These are strategies that have been in use for a long time. Okay. Would you guys be okay if we just go into the third one? Do you need a break? You need a break? No? Anybody need a break? So we can embarrass you? No? Okay. All right. Well, let's just go into the third one. And this is Comrade Marx. I was asked earlier, when we were talking about Darwin, to give some specific examples of how this has snuck into Christian universities, and I think, like, honest to goodness, like, theologically conservative Christian universities, it's not like an explicit problem, nor is Nietzsche. This guy is. And the things we're going to talk about right now are going to get really uncomfortable. I have read, studied, and taught Marx. I've read Das Kapital. I have read the Communist Manifesto. I've been teaching out of that in my intro to philosophy class for years, part of the political philosophy. And Marx is kind of like Nietzsche and Darwin in the sense that if you're a Gen Xer or older, so I'm like a full-on Gen Xer, graduated from high school in 1990, so I am a true product of the 80s, which may explain some things. Like I mourned the other day hearing the loss of Eddie Van Halen. I'm like, no, it's over. But if you're my age or a little older or pay attention to history, you know the face of the Red Menace that many of us grew up with. Does anybody around my age or older remember as a kid the film The Day After? Anybody remember that? It was about nuclear holocaust. I think it was about 8 years old when that movie came out, scared to death. I'm like, oh man, I'm going to wake up to nuclear winter tomorrow. Didn't happen. But we were all scared of that, and then I remember where I was when the wall came down. I remember where I was. I was working at a CVS in my hometown at the collapse of the Soviet Union. I thought, what in the world? Whoever thought that would happen? Well, and then Marx went away. We don't have to worry about him anymore. Ash heap of history and all that stuff. Wrong. Marxism, Leninism, communism, socialism, these are all varieties of the same animal. It would be like saying golden retriever, chocolate lab, whatever. They're all forms of the same basic animal, right? A dog is a dog. So when we're talking about those things, these ideas are still there, and there are still some holdouts. Places, so talking politically now, China, Vietnam, North Korea, Cuba. A book I listened to recently, if I may interrupt myself, if you want an idea of what life in North Korea looks like, there's a book, I believe it's called Camp 14 or Camp 15, I can't remember, it's one or the other. Anybody know the book I'm talking about? Somebody fact check me here. Yeah, it's either Camp 14 or 15. Short little book, I listened to it my trip out to Michigan this past summer. The story of the only known escapee from a North Korean prison camp who was born there. This guy had no idea what the outside world was. Have you ever read the book The Count of Monte Cristo? You know what my favorite character is? The Jesuit priest. Camp 14? Thank you. Escape from Camp 14. Okay, thank you. Escape from Camp 14. But I love the Jesuit priest in The Count of Monte Cristo because he teaches the guy about the outside world. Well, there was an old political prisoner that got taken from the world, put into a camp with this kid, and told him about the outside world. He escaped. Fascinating story. If you want to learn what communism does, read that book. It's hellish. It's horrible. We love to hate on Nazi Germany because they exterminated 6 million Jews. Maybe they would have gotten more had they had more time. I'm telling you, Marxism, Leninism has killed way, way, way more people than that. Way more. In just a little over 100 years. Going back to 1917. 103 years-ish. It's really been in force. So, as a political system, there's no hope. despite what you're being told today, no, it doesn't just need to be in the hands of the right people. It doesn't work. Collectivism never works. You know what group of people collectivism nearly wiped off the face of the earth? The Pilgrims. Mayflower Compact. They thought it would be a good idea. Hey, and they were trying. It's not like they're like, hey, let's come up with the stupidest idea we could imagine. I mean, they're trying. But they said, you know what we're going to do? We're going to have a system where nobody owns anything. We all share it in common. You know what happens when that gets enacted? Nobody takes responsibility. They nearly starved to death. What were they celebrating that first Thanksgiving? That they got rescued? Nope. They figured it out and said, this is dumb. We actually need to be responsible for our own stuff. And they were celebrating the bounty. It works. It works. But what is the problem with Marx? Well, I think it is a failed system. You can disagree with me. That's okay. We can have an open debate about that. But there's a worldview behind it. And the core question behind the worldview is who or what is behind human history. And if you think this is not affecting college kids, oh man, I don't know if it's happening in Christian schools, but I will tell you that the first day of orientation in most colleges, this is the conversation. Now, they're not throwing up a picture of Comrade Marx and showing you the guy really needs, maybe it was COVID, but he needs a beard trim. I don't know what his problem is. Yeah, it's just like, poof, this is horrible. But what is it with these guys and their hair? I'm just saying. So they aren't told, well, we're going to give you some Marx 101 today directly, but it's the questions they ask. And one of the questions is based on this: who or what is behind human history? Now, again, one of my favorite passages, maybe you've heard me speak on it before, is the book of Daniel, because it's very worldview-ish. There's stuff going on there with Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. They're dealing with real worldview issues as they are forced to enroll at the University of Babylon in 605 BC. And one of the things that Daniel tells us about right up front is he's like, Nebuchadnezzar came and laid siege to Jerusalem. Well, big deal. Jerusalem is like a backwater little town compared to Babylon. Babylon's is a technological wonder. But he doesn't just say, the powerful beat down the less powerful. That's Nietzsche. He doesn't say that, it just is what it is. We're a bunch of animals, and so the bigger animal came and took care of the smaller animal. That's Darwin. He actually says in chapter 1, verse 2, who or what is behind human history? And he says, the Lord, Yahweh, gave Jehoiakim into the hand of Nebuchadnezzar. So he's not just telling us what happened, but why. So who or what is behind human history? Well, for the Christian, and that's actually one of the easy Sunday school answers, because there's 3 Sunday school answers. You know this, right? Jesus, God, and the Bible. In a judicious use of any of those 3 answers will get any Sunday school teacher off your back. But sometimes it's right. Right? So if you say, Andy, who do you think is behind human history, who or what? Well, I would say, God. Okay, good. Glad I cleared that up. But if you were to ask me, Andy, are there other options? Oh, yeah. I'd be a fool to say that there's not. I ask this of churches sometimes, and they're like, can't be no other option. Oh, yes, there is. I'm not saying they're right, but there are certainly other options. I just gave you 2. Marx says, and you can read this if you so desire. In fact, I would highly recommend it. Go order yourself a copy of the Communist Manifesto. It's short. You can read it in a few sittings. And might rock you a little bit when you read it. So at least you know what it's talking about. It's kind of like people that tell you what the Constitution says. They've never actually read the Constitution. I'm just saying, you might want to read it and actually know it says primary sources and all. Like my daughter, I'll give you for instance, my daughter, every year about this time of year, she's ready to come home and go downtown and tear down the Columbus statue. Every year, she's like, he's horrible. Those innocent savages. I'm like, there is no such thing. Meanwhile, my son, we just enrolled him in a small private classical school. He's like, Dad, we're reading Columbus's journals. Oh. And are you finding something different that you were told all those years you went to public schools? Like, yeah. All right, just saying. Primary sources. But you'll find out very quickly who he says is, who or what is behind human history? Does anybody know the answer? Take a guess. It ain't God. So let's just jettison that one. Or any other Sunday school answer. Anybody know? Kinda. But a force driving us. I'm sorry. Almost. Let me give you a comparison. Okay, just so you have something like to kind of rub it up against, because that's helpful to me. One of the other things that I teach in a little section of political philosophy, and we're just, you can feel the cold of the iceberg. We're not even touching it, right? So we're just blast past it so fast. One of the other things that I teach is a guy named Thomas Hobbes, 17th century English philosopher, wrote a book called Leviathan. This would have been something the founding fathers would have had in their back pocket. Not this, because it's clearly later than the founding of our country. But the idea still existed. But in Thomas Hobbes' Leviathan, he's actually arguing, hey, we need what is called a social contract so that we can all get along. Meaning laws, right? There are laws that govern how we're supposed to deal with one another, right? But does the law make you do it? No. What makes you do it? There's got to be a coercive force that will force you into obeying the law should you choose to break it. So it's not the law itself, it's the authority behind it. Does that make sense? And he said, and the reason we need that, because what we have behind human history is constant warfare. I don't know if there's any Walking Dead fans in the room. I just wish that show would go away. And so help me, if Rick wakes up in a dream, I know the whole thing, but if he just wakes up, that was a weird dream, I will be so mad. But it needs to end. And back when it was still interesting, I actually have a talk that I give with Hobbes. It's called Thomas Hobbes and the Walking Dead. This is why we can't have nice things. It's not cool anymore because nobody watches the show. But there's a cycle in the zombie apocalypse show of people getting what they want, keeping it for a while, worrying about it's going to be taken away, fighting with another group, and the cycle goes on and on and on. That, I just gave you the crux of Thomas Hobbes' Leviathan. That's what I just gave you. So he says it's warfare. And he's not entirely wrong. Not entirely. He's not entirely correct either, because what he's leaving out is a sovereignty issue. But are humans constantly in fighting with one another? Sure. Yeah. Marx says, to answer the question, who or what is behind human history, is class struggle. Class struggle. There are two kinds of people. Very binary, just like Nietzsche's slaves and masters, sheep and wolves. And again, if you have to ask what you are, you're not sure, you're neither master nor wolf. You poor little thing. Oh, sheep. Going to get eaten. So you can be an individual sheep, just fine. Get eaten last then, right? So the two categories, you're either what he calls the bourgeois. Don't ask me to spell that. Can't do it. There's an R in there. Bourgeois, or the proletariat, the worker. Listen to political speeches right now. Listen to how often you and I are referred to as workers. That is not what I am. Is that what you are? Although in the West we have engaged in a total work culture. Why do we work? To get days off so that you can work. Like the whole dignity of doing jobs and working is completely fallen apart in the West. But for Marx now, he's got the bourgeois and the proletariat. The bourgeois has the power. The bourgeois has the power over the proletariat. And it is unfair, and unjust. So, Comrade Marx has a solution, and that is the violent overthrow by the proletariat of the bourgeoisie. Violent. Rise up. Does the symbol look familiar? It's well over 100 years old. Now, that may sound like, you're like, okay, that doesn't quite sound right. I would agree with you. But you might be thinking, okay, so what's the problem? Well, we haven't quite gotten there yet. The crux of Marxism is economic revolution. The crux of Marxism is economic revolution. You cannot possibly, and I cannot possibly, be generous and responsible with our own resources. They have to be taken from you, reallocated, and everybody gets put on the same even playing field. The fact of the matter is, very soon after the 1917 Red October, 1917 into early November, Vladimir Lenin overthrowing the provisional democratic government after the fall of the Romanov Empire. Very soon after that, proponents of Leninism, Marxism, realized that a global economic revolution was not going to happen. In fact, economically, how long did the Soviet Union last? 70 years? Not all that good of a run, right? On the world stage of history. And it collapsed internally, basically because of economics. So, how did they know that? Well, in 1919, most people don't know this. I didn't until recently. In 1919, there was an attempted Soviet-style revolution in Germany. It failed. Did you know that? I didn't really know that. And let me tell you how I know all this. You guys know Oberlin College? Right. So on my way back from Michigan, I stopped at Oberlin, and I completely forgot where I was. I completely forgot, like, the situation. I'm parked right in front of that bakery that made national news. You know what I'm talking about? Yeah. I'm like, place looks familiar. It just didn't dawn on me because there's a wonderful used bookstore right next to it, like a 5 and dime. Chris showed me. That place is awesome. So I went in there. This is June. I went in there and I hit my normal spots. I went over to the religion section. I didn't find anything. Looked at the literature. Didn't really see anything. Tried history. Picked up a cool book on Alexander the Great and his Afghan campaign. And then I went over to the philosophy section, which I had never looked at before, and I've been in there a couple times. I don't know how that happened. And I'm looking at going, what kind of post-Soviet era bookstore did I step into? I mean, there's like all kinds of stuff. And I thought, oh, I know where I am. So I scooped up an armload of books, and I walked up to the counter, and I bought them, and I swear the girls that work there think I am totally woke because I'm reading this stuff. So they think I'm cool. I'm like, you have no idea. So anyway, I'm reading primary sources of a thing I'm going to tell you about here in a second. And I'm learning about, I said, I didn't know about the failed German thing. I didn't know that. In 1924, after years of planning, fundraising from rich German industrialists, that's incongruous with Leninism, by the way. Just saying, personal money, nope. There was a group of literally spoiled, rotten, wealthy Jewish boys, young men, who are sons of rich German industrialists, making their money in commodities, winemaking, industry, and they wanted nothing more than to rebel against their fathers. And so they got the money from another rich Jewish industrialist, much like their dads, and they literally started an institute like a brick and mortar building called the Frankfurt School. They were going to call it the Institute for Marxist Research. But I thought, that might be a little obvious. So they started, I'm serious. I'm dead serious. I know I'm snarky, but I'm also serious. I'm serious. So they started this actual brick and mortar place called the Frankfurt School, and it was a think tank. And their job in this think tank was to figure out how to move ahead Marxist ideals without the economic revolution, because they saw, okay, I mean, it happened once in the Soviet Union, but it was ripe. Things were going horribly. I'm not saying the Romanovs were like awesome, but it was kind of better than what they wound up with, but it was still just a ripe tinderbox, and off it took. But, well, Germany wasn't quite that bad, and so they said, well, we're going to have to come up with something else. You want to know what they started developing there? Ideas like intersectionality. You know what that means? That means that if you're white, male, married to a woman, and, well, I guess that would mean you're heterosexual, wouldn't it? Those things kind of go together. And you have a job and a bank account, you are forever guilty, and there's never any redemption. Now, if you're all of that, but you're a woman, you have 1 degree of intersection in your life, because now you've moved from oppressor by nature of what God has planned for me. I am in perpetual guilt and sin, according to the Frankfurt School. It is a new religion, make no mistake. But my wife, well, because she's a woman, she has one level of being the oppressed. A time that I don't remember, but perhaps you've actually heard of. So this has been, and by the way, many of these guys took refuge in the United States in the early days, after the fall of the Weimar Republic and the rise of fascism. They took refuge in the United States. And this has been festering in this country for almost 100 years, and it's been simmering for 50-ish, beginning in the summer of 1969. Did you know that the Ford Motor Company introduced a Mustang that year that was green? Do you know what the actual name of the color was? I know this. Anti-establishment. A phrase that probably some of us have used and we don't know where it's come from. Stick it to the man. You know who the man is? Anybody know? Who's the man? The bourgeoisie. The rich industrialist, right? Kinda. The Frankfurt School developed this idea. It's me. You know why? I'm not a rich industrialist. We were discussing this. I have no marketable skills. I have degrees in theology and philosophy. Nobody's like headhunting me. Oh, we want your skills. I know you do. Like, so that's not happening. No, I'm the man that needs to be taken down like a system. Why? Because I have white patriarchy. That means I hold in authority over my son his estate, which is a house in Scranton that's probably not all that interested in inheriting from me. But according to the Frankfurt School, I would never just give it to him. He has to earn it. He's under my thumb because he's oppressed. Sounds good, doesn't it? Here's the thing with Marx and why it's taken hold. And I'm telling you, ladies and gentlemen, you may disagree with me on some of this stuff. You may. I'm scared to death of this because I'm watching it, and many, many, many churches are jumping on this bandwagon. Please tell me, in the 2,000 years of church history, what bandwagon issue has ever been the right one? Which one? I can't think of one. And here's why it's so attractive. Marxism is a Christian heresy. Marxism is a Christian heresy. What does that mean? A heresy means a doctrine that is orthodox has broken down. So it's kind of true, but it is not completely true, therefore it is completely false. Right? Does that make sense? To say, like New Testament scholar Bart Ehrman says, he teaches at North Carolina State, I believe, or maybe Duke. I think he's been at both. North Carolina State. You can go down again to the Barnes & Noble, and if you go to the religion section, you're going to find his books right next to Ravi Zacharias' books on the same shelf. And they're going to have titles like The Triumph of Christianity, on purpose. Not because he thinks that it was this movement from God that swept the world. Oh, no, it's just a sociological phenomena. Because he would say Jesus was a real person, not God. That is a heresy. That's the thing that St. Nicholas, you ever heard of that guy? Council of Nicaea, punched Arius in the face. Oh, man, I want to see that. Laid back, Santa Claus punched a guy in the face. As in the guy Arius who started the Arian heresy, that Jesus became God, but was not in essence God. Heresies matter. Why is it a heresy? Christianity is the very first religion, and I do not think that's a dirty word. You know what the word religion means? It comes from the Latin religio, means obligation. You have obligations as Christians? To me? To your families? To your church, to God? Yeah. It's not a dirty word. Anyway, Christianity is the first worldview religion that actually gives dignity to and raises up the victim. The first one. Let me give you a title of a couple books. If you want to check this out, this is not light reading. They're thin, but dense. Okay? So, a couple books. Perhaps you might be familiar with American evangelical thinker Francis Schaeffer. Let me give you his French counterpart. It's a guy named Jacques Ellul, E-L-L-U-L. Jacques Ellul, E-L-L-U-L. And I would highly recommend his book, Jesus and Marx. Highly recommend his book, Jesus and Marx. And then another Frenchman, Girard. It's in my Western English tongue, Gilson is Gilson, but G-I-L-S-O-N. I probably butchered that. Sorry, French students. In his book, I See Satan Fall Like Lightning. And it talks about the scapegoat. It is because of Jesus being the ultimate scapegoat that the victims have dignity. Right? No Jesus, no dignity. Right? Marx sounds like Christianity. Why? Because it appears it's giving power to the oppressed. But here's the thing about Marx. The only way Marxism can work is it has to have some things in permanency. Number one, a victim class. Has to have victims that stay victims. Victims who are redeemed within Christianity, do you stay a victim or do you become a victor? Romans 8, anybody? We are more than huper nakeo. What the literal translation of that is? Super victorious ones. Think Avengers. Without the vengeance. That's not good. Right? You are superheroes. Huper nakeo. Marx has to have a permanent victim class and a permanent bourgeois enemy that can never, ever be redeemed. Never. Marx ultimately destroys the dignity of individuals. Ultimately destroys the dignity of individuals. Christianity builds them up. I'm going to let that go. But this is everywhere, folks. It's bad. It's really, really bad. It's been getting worse. And if you think that conceding, confessing your guilt is going to save you, you will get canceled. Radical liberals eat their own. And they don't build things, they destroy. I'm going to share a story with you. I very well may have shared this with you last time I was here. I don't remember. I'm getting old. I didn't take my Centrum today, so I forget. Did I talk to you about Alfred the Great when I was here? Does anybody remember that? Getting furrowed brows, I'm going to take that as a no. A good sign that this might be new. Hot dog. So, just a few weeks ago, I was on campus of Alfred University in Alfred, New York. Don't your, Steve, don't your mom and dad go to Western New York often? Not anymore. Oh, I'm sorry. Oh, was that Hornell they went to? It was in that area, like Olean or something. All right. Well, it's near where I know Steve's parents used to visit. So Alfred, New York is a town of about 1,000 people. And there's a little county road that splits the town right in half, right down the steep valley. And on one side of the valley, I think it's it doesn't matter, eastern side, is Alfred State University, part of the State University of New York. Not one of the larger schools, but still much bigger than the school I went to, and bigger than the school I teach at, probably 10,000 students. On the other side of the valley is a private school called Alfred University. Now, I was there about 3 years ago for the first time. I was invited by the local intervarsity group to come and speak for a couple times for their weekend stuff. And I'm walking around campus, and because when I visit schools, and I try to visit them often, as much as I can, I try to do what one of my heroes, Paul, did in Acts 17 when he's at the University of Athens. That scared me. When he's at the University of Athens, which wasn't real, I made that up. But when he gets to speak in the Areopagus, kind of the faculty lounge of the University of Athens, and he says, "Men of Athens, I see in every way you are very religious." How did he know that? Because I look carefully at your objects of worship. So when I visit a university, I try to look at their objects of worship. Where do I do that? Well, it's really easy. I go to the student union, whatever that may be, whatever they call it, and I just look at the bulletin boards. I get an eyeful, and then I go to the bookstore, and I hit up the sections. I go to the English literature, the religion, if they have one, history, and philosophy. And I try to figure out, and I'm looking at the textbooks, and I'm trying to figure out, what are they reading? It gives me an idea. And when you see the same book popping up over and over and over again in all four of those sections, you know what's going on. So the first time I was there, I'm standing in the middle of campus, and I'm looking up at the statue of this guy called Alfred. I'm like, who is this guy? I didn't even know. It's like, he kind of looks like a warrior. The statue is, he has a book in his right hand. He has a shield on his left, and he's kind of wearing like the skirt thing, so it's mildly inappropriate. But I'm trying to look up, and I'm like, who is this guy? So I'm like, I don't even get it. And I looked it up on my phone. It's like Anglo-Saxon king. I'm like, okay, great. So that just sounds like a Viking to me. I have no idea what that means. Barbarian. Why would you name a school after that? Well, I was just back at Alfred a few weeks ago because the woman who runs the intervarsity group. She and I have become friends, a really interesting lady, and I was there interviewing her about her story of college. She went to Cortland State University for my next book that I'm going to write. So I'm doing a little background. And I went back to look at the Alfred statue with new eyes, because now I know who this guy is. I want to tell you his story. Alfred the Great, he came to be king of one of the 4 kingdoms of England long before unified England, Angleland, right? In the second half of the 9th century. He probably grew up reading Beowulf. And Alfred never should have been king. He had 2 older brothers, both killed in battle. Alfred himself was sickly. Historians believe he had Crohn's disease or something like it. All he ate was thin gruel, couldn't eat meat, made him really sick. And he became king of Wessex around about 869 AD. For 100 years, England had been under the knife of the Danes. Not the spear Danes that get themselves rescued in Beowulf, but they have gone Viking. Viking is a verb, not a noun. That means raping, burning, pillaging, destroying. And for 100 years, beginning with the sack of St. Cuthbert's on Lindisfarne Island, 792, they have destroyed. There are 4 kingdoms in England. There was Northumbria, where St. Cuthbert's is located, East Anglia, Mercia, Wessex, all the way down in the southwest corner up against Wales. So if you can kind of picture a reverse L of Great Britain roughly, it's all the way down to the bottom. Well, new king, a new opportunity. The Vikings, the Danes, they sent envoys to Alfred, and they said, well, you know what has happened everywhere else. All the other kingdoms had capitulated, and they had. Some put up a little resistance, but not much. And they said, we will do the same to you. Surrender now. You can keep your lands. You may keep your title. You will pay us a hefty tax, but you will leave us alone. Give it up. And Alfred basically said, want it? Come and get it. They did. They invaded Wessex. They came from the sea. What were they called? Sea wolves. So, Alfred fled into the marshlands of Wales. Just he and a few of his retainers. One historian I read in a book called Under the Dragon's Banner said, Western civilization, including the memory and knowledge of Christianity, for a time was reduced to 30 square yards of swampland. Wales. Alfred had no help. The Irish and the French, Francia, were both under the knife of the Danes. The Spanish and the Italians were busy fighting off Moorish invasions. That's Islam. No one to help him. Not one person. But he said, all right, we're going to put out a call and we're going to see what happens. So he sent out messengers secretly all throughout England. He said, on a particular day, I'm going to be at St. Egbert's Stone. Let's see what happens. So he goes to St. Egbert's. And as dawn breaks and light begins to come across the trees, men start pouring out of the forest. From all the other kingdoms. Said, if you will lead us, we will follow you. All right, let's go kick some Dane butt. So, Eastman translation. So they had a major battle with the Danes. By the way, there's actually a miniseries on Netflix that kind of deals with this. It's called The Last Kingdom. It's a strong PG-13. I'm just warning you now. But it actually treats Alfred very fairly. He's not the main character, but it's interesting. It's also a book series called the Saxon Chronicles. So anyway, he defeats this major Viking army, and the Vikings weren't a unified group, but for a while, England was at peace, and the Jarl, the Earl of the Viking horde, his name is Guthrum, converted to Christianity. Alfred could have had his head on a platter. Instead, he said, no, I will baptize you myself. I will become your godfather. And he changed his name from Guthrum to Athelstan, standing stone. England was at peace. And the coalescence of the kingdoms began to happen under Alfred. By the way, he's the only English king with great after his name. But the story isn't so good because Alfred was a good tactician, strategist, leader. Alfred was an ardent, hardcore, deeply devoted Christian, raised in the court of Charlemagne across the English Channel. And Alfred said, barbarians destroy, Christians build. Barbarians keep people low, Christians raise them up. How are we going to do that? Well, one of the things that Alfred did is that he decided that he was going to translate Latin texts by himself into Anglo-Saxon for the priests. And one of those texts was from the 6th century, Gregory I, a pope. And he wrote a book on pastoral care. So if you go to the local Christian bookstore and you go to a section on pastoral leadership, like those kinds of books, it was how to be a pastor. And Alfred translated that into Anglo-Saxon for his priests, and he wrote in the preface, you can Google this, just Google Alfred's preface to pastoral care, something like that, it's going to come right up. And he wrote his own introduction to the priests, and he said, as I look across England and I see all of this, the destruction, the smoking ruins of churches, libraries, scriptoriums, monasteries, the decaying and stinking bodies of monks, priests, nuns. As I looked and I saw all of this, I thought, oh, we have the wisdom. We knew that it was possessed in those places, shelves, beautifully illuminated, and hours of work. But Alfred said, we knew the wisdom is there, but we could not access it. Why? Because we would not bend the knee and follow those who had gone before us in wisdom. We ceased learning how to learn. If we're going to rebuild, we're going to have a sword in one hand and a shovel in the other, book in our back pocket. Christianity builds, has answers to these three. These are not the answers. But I'm telling you, I swear to you on everything that God has called me to do, these are wolves. And we do not just ignore them, as I've seen some of my colleagues in Christianity say, don't read it, don't touch it. Yes, read it. How will you know? That's going to be dangerous for us, ladies and gentlemen. Why? Because this is the world of ideas. Are you prepared? Where do your weapons come from? Forge them yourself? Or do you visit the armory of heaven? Do you think it unchristian to say, not only do I not believe these things, but I'm going to see to it that these wolves are slain, hunted, taken out, all for the greater glory of God. And in my case, perhaps rescuing some of this generation before it's too late. Right? Okay. Speech is over. Questions, comments, snide remarks? I can give you a couple titles for books if you're interested in the Frankfurt School. And these are primary sources, not written by like somebody who says, this is dumb, right? But like they're saying, hey, we're awesome, and here's why. Probably the best book is a history of the Frankfurt School. It's called Grand Hotel Abyss. Grand Hotel Abyss. One of my treasures I found over at Oberlin. I'm totally woke with that book now. And if I can recommend to you dealing with what's called critical theory is what we're talking about here. An excellent resource that I could never do myself is a guy named Neil Shenvi, Shenvi. He has a PhD in something really practical like chemistry, and he's a self-taught apologist, and he's a brilliant guy, good speaker, and he's a good dude. I got to meet him last fall at a conference where I was speaking out in Michigan, and he is your go-to source. If you just Google Neil Shenvi, Shenvi, and like critical race theory or critical theory or Frankfurt School, any of those words, his stuff's going to pop right up. He's got a little 15-page peer-reviewed article that he wrote on a lot of this stuff, explaining like things like intersectionality and what it means, the origin of words like white privilege and stuff like that. Where did that come from, and what that means, and why you ought not to succumb to it. So there's a lot of that stuff in there, because honestly, if Paul's right, God has chosen the times and places for all men to live so that some would seek him and find him, not need to apologize for who you are. So you can you let Neil Shenvi be a resource. Any phone friend questions? Okay. All right. Well, it's Christmas Miracle. Only 9 minutes over, so that's good. No, I'm surprised too. So let's just pray, if I can pray with you, and because I'm kind of out of gas, so I need to be done. God, I pray that we would be a people who are passionate. But God, I pray that we are a people who are thinkers. God, I would ask that you would help us to remember that it is you who have revealed yourself to us, not the other way around. God, you have asked questions of your creation. God, I pray we would just ruminate, meditate on them. What are you asking of us? God, I pray for my brothers and sisters here right now that face these wolves, and sometimes, God, we don't even know it, because they are indeed in sheep's clothing. God, help us to be discerning and wise serpents, God. Help us to know. God, help us to be a people who can answer questions as we take captive every thought for your Son. In his name we pray. All right, so hopefully I'll see y'all tomorrow. I didn't scare you off. Too bad? We okay? Still friends? Oh, good.